a call for balance, and the call was so loud and clear on that April day. 20 million Americans came into the streets on that Earth Day. The streets, the parks, and they gathered around the country to come out and say, enough. We literally can't live with this. We have to get some kind of balance again. We have to balance the environment and the economic conduct of the big industry. And the amazing thing, when we first look at the pictures, it's not, a radical, fringy movement. It's cross-partisan, just like the Citizens United response. It's Republicans, Democrats, it's people in suits and ties, it's families, it's people in work clothes. Americans of all areas came together on that day, and the response was incredible. I mean, we forget when Congress and the government actually was incredibly responsive. After Earth Day, within about 6 months, EPA, created by President Richard Nixon, a Republican in the White House, Clean Water Act, that took a couple of years to get this all done, but Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, Endangered Species Act, Toxic Substances Act, Superfund, Eastern Mountain Wilderness Act, first fuel economy standards ever for autos, on and on and on, getting lead out of gasoline. Just a whole wave of reform that was astonishing. And so, we also got a constitutional amendment, by the way, to lower the voting age to 18, 19, 20-year-olds who were fighting in Vietnam, who were paying taxes and working, who were adults for every other purpose except weren't allowed to vote. We corrected that with a constitutional amendment in 1970. So there was an active, vibrant democracy. And of course there were problems and challenges and discord, as there always are in a vibrant democracy like America. But there was a functioning system of government that I think, would find it hard to imagine. We had the biggest financial crisis in generations. We have a global climate catastrophe unfolding before us. We have so many deep problems, debt problems, that just seem like the government is totally incapable of responding, and it doesn't have to be that way. It wasn't that way. But the reason I go back to that is because there was a lawyer in Richmond, Virginia, who saw this happening and realized, yeah, this was correcting the balance, and corporations weren't going to have the same sort of free reign exercise of power that Americans were standing up a bit. And he wrote a memo. His name was Lewis Powell. He was on the board of the Philip Morris Cigarette Company. He had argued, actually, in cases that the government wasn't permitted to restrict advertising about cigarettes or to say that cigarettes were harmful unless the cigarette corporations had a right of reply. He lost that case. Nobody thought that was a serious argument at the time. But he was on the board of about a dozen other corporations as well. And he wrote a memo to yet another client, the Chamber of Commerce, the United States Chamber of Commerce. And he described what was unfolding as an attack on the free enterprise system. And it's a remarkable memo in a number of ways, but it is very frank about what corporations needed to do. And it called for essentially a change, a restructuring of the American legal, social, and economic structure by corporations funding for as long as it took, organized together to change the political system and assert power much more forcefully. And I quote the memo at some length in the book, but let me just read what Lewis Powell in 1970 wrote to the Chamber of Commerce in his description of what they needed to do and what corporate America needed to do. Independent and uncoordinated activity by individual corporations, as important as that is, will not be sufficient. Strength lies in organization, in careful long-range planning and implementation, in consistency of action over an indefinite period of years, and in the political power available only through united action. Political power is necessary, and that power must be used aggressively and with determination, without embarrassment and without reluctance. He then said, most interestingly, especially with an activist-minded Supreme Court, the judiciary may be the most important for social and economic and political change, the most important instrument for social, political, and economic change. So Lewis Powell was calling for the use of an activist-minded Supreme Court. He didn't mean it as an insult, he saw it as an opportunity to have an activist-minded Supreme Court be used as an instrument for corporate America to engage in social, political, and legal change. Now, we've all maybe dashed off memos after, late at night when we're mad at some issue or written a letter or sent something off. So what? Lewis Powell did that. But here's the so what. Lewis Powell not only was a powerful lawyer on the board of all these corporations. 6 months after writing this memo, Lewis Powell became Justice Lewis Powell. He was appointed to the Supreme Court. He was appointed to the Supreme Court in 1971, the same day that a well-known conservative, William Rehnquist, was appointed. And I say that because William Rehnquist, he was so conservative that it was controversial. He almost didn't get confirmed. Lewis Powell was not controversial. He was viewed as a very, gentlemanly lawyer from Virginia, a moderate. Nobody knew about this memo. It was not disclosed. And the Judiciary Committee that held hearings didn't know that there was a memo calling for an activist-minded court to be used for social, legal, and economic change. And Lewis Powell didn't disclose it to either them or the American people. So he sailed through, it was approved. William Rehnquist had a tough time, but also was approved. So they went on the bench. And then Lewis Powell did his work, but so too did the Chamber of Commerce and corporate America. The memo was implemented. And it was, this effort was funded, still being funded for years and years and years, to do exactly what the memo called for, what Lewis Powell called for. A whole wave of organizations, some of which you may know about. ALEC is now in the news, the American Legislative Exchange Council has started up. A whole bunch of legal foundations, they're called, to bring cases, creating the notion of corporate speech, corporate speakers, corporate person. It's all in the briefs. I quote some of them in the book, but you can read the whole briefs if you want. These legal foundations that never existed until the 1970s in response to this game plan. Washington Legal Foundation, New England Legal Foundation, Pacific Legal Foundation. There's one in every region in the country as a legal foundation, and what they do is they file briefs, file cases, trying to strike down laws that affect corporate profit. And they do it by creating a new doctrine called corporate speech. There was no such thing as corporate speech. Commercial speech was not viewed as part of the First Amendment. It was viewed as something that is a reflection of the people, the government of the people. You didn't want to make sure unpopular speech wasn't suppressed, that minorities were protected by, so that they could express, unpopular ideas, that we had a vibrant free speech for people, if you will. But there wasn't a notion that corporations were economic entities that could be regulated or not, depending on what the people thought was appropriate. 1978, the first time in American history, an election law got struck down as a violation of corporate speech. And Lewis Powell wrote the decision, 5-4 decision, that struck down Massachusetts' law saying corporations could not spend money in citizen referenda. Bank Boston, Gillette, Digital Equipment Corporation brought that case. They lost all the way to the Supreme Court because there was no such thing as a corporate right to defy the people's decision that they shouldn't be spending money in elections. Lewis Powell wrote the decision, 5-4, the law got struck down. First time in 200 years of American history. Lewis Powell went on to write 4 decisions in 6 years, all 5-4 decisions, saying corporations had a speech right that trumped and vetoed the people's laws. Environmental laws, energy laws, public health laws, all got struck down as a result under this doctrine.